Hi, I'm Kate Warren with Devex, and delighted to have some time to chat with Janti Soeripto, President and CEO of Save the Children US, and Yvonne Arunga, Regional Program Operations Director at Save the Children International, about a topic that has received perhaps more attention than ever this year, and that is diversity, equity, and inclusion in development. Today, I want to take a moment to dig into where we are, what more needs to be done, and what diversity really means for our global community. So Janti and Yvonne, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
So Janti, I'd like to start with you. The need for more diversity, equity, inclusion in the development sector is not a new one, something we've been shedding light on and working on for years. We just heard a powerful discussion between Deray McKesson and Renu Adwala around the Black Lives Matter movement and the need for police reform as a big component of racial justice. As we know, the events of this year have sparked conversation, debate, and action on everything from the makeup of an organization's staff to decolonizing aid and really changing the way we do development. Deray McKesson in his commentary said he felt that this year, this time, these conversations feel different. Do you think it is? Do you think we are in a moment where we are moving beyond just talking and into real action?
Well, I'm also an optimist, right? So I would certainly hope so, and I do agree that it feels different this time. Now we also need to make sure that we keep an eye on if that energy is sustained, and if a real allyship across the sector and beyond is there and is really deepened, I would say. But yeah, I can see it's there's real opportunity in that, and that it is broader and more deeply felt perhaps, and maybe that is also because of the pandemic, more deeply felt than before. I do think this sector is no different in this regard than any other sector, the private sector, the public sector. There's unconscious bias and underlying power structures that are in the way of having people bring their whole selves to the work and to the organizations.
Yeah, I'd like to dig into that a little more because you are one of a handful of non-white CEOs of US-based NGOs, and you say that it doesn't make this sector any different than, say, Wall Street or the tech sector, where maybe that is more considered the norm. But in our field, which is really designed to lift up underrepresented groups, why do you think that still is the case? Beyond unconscious bias, what are the reasons you think we're still at this state?
I think there are similar reasons for it as there are in other sectors. It's historic. It was built on the premise. Many of the large organizations and the incumbents in the sector were built at the early sort of 20th century, late 19th century, built on the premise of wealthy countries give money to poor countries because they need help and development. So there is definitely a sort of a post-colonial feel to it. So that seeps into our language. When I joined this sector 8 years ago, I was really surprised at words like beneficiary that still has such a broad sort of use. Capacity building, everybody seems to think is a great thing, as if countries do not have capacity. So I think it is sometimes it's in those very small but important things that indicates that those power structures are still there. Some of our assumptions about how we do the work, how we approach our partners in local civil society, in the countries where we work, how we see those partnerships, how we treat them. Do we respect them? All those things, I think, are up for debate and reflection.
Yeah, well, so and diversity and development really comprises a wide range of factors. So there's geographic diversity, and then within those geographies, in that context, it can be different voices that are left out. Might be gender, race, religion, socioeconomic status, disability status, sexual orientation, gender identity, age. There's a lot that goes into it. At SAVE, how do your DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion plans take into consideration all of these at both a global and a local level? And Yvonne, I might punt over to you. You are based in Nairobi. And when you think about diversity within your local context in Kenya, what does that mean for you?
Yeah, so for us, of course, it's a little bit more nuanced. I know in other parts of the world, it takes, it's perhaps based on race, but for me, working for the the region and the Kenya office, particularly when most of our staff is from the local area, then it's more about other sorts of issues that we use to sort of or the community uses to marginalize other people. So this is based on either gender, like you said, sexual orientation. It's based on age, or it's based on ethnicity, something that's very, very relevant for our context. So what we have to ensure is particularly the stigmatization of people that are living with disabilities and children who are very vulnerable and marginalized. That's a key constituent for us. How do we make sure that they're incorporated in our programming? But that's external facing. But internally, we also have to go the extra mile to ensure that our staff also represents those vulnerable and marginalized constituents that we are seeking to represent or have local actors represent.
Yeah, and this moment of this pandemic this year has halted international travel, and many organizations, it's really accelerated their efforts or plans to shift more ownership decision making to the local level. What have you seen has been the impact of this shift, and do you see us ever going back to the way we were doing it just even a year ago?
Yeah, no, I don't see us going back. It's a commitment we've had in a while, not just because of COVID, but COVID has accelerated it, has made it move a little bit faster than it has in the past. So in a way, that's a silver lining to what has been a very challenging and exceptional year. I mean, because of COVID and travel restrictions to the field, it's not been possible to do our business as usual. We've had to think out of the box. What could we do differently? How can we, empower those who are already in the physical space where we want to deliver action? How can we empower them to do it, themselves? So it's driven this agenda that much further.
At least we can get some good things out of this past year.
Yes.
Janti, you mentioned how diversity, and particularly for you at SAVE, you think about it not just your staff and but also partnerships and how you do your programming. And I'm curious to hear what role you think donors play or could do more of to either push or support organizations as they seek more diverse staff partners, particularly at the local level.
Absolutely, I think donors have a huge role to play there and can be a real force for good. I think, and there's been a lot of talk about that. Clearly, the grand bargain certainly, tried to give that a jolt. With mixed results, I would say. A lot of talk about that, more flexible funding to local partners, different partnerships, etc. A push on large global organizations like SAVE to do so, but then not the commensurate follow through from donors, I would say, in that space. So more compliance and more, sort of administrative processes, making it difficult for local partners to adhere to those, and then not the flexibility and multi-year funding made available in order to do so. So I would encourage donors to sort of follow through on their words with real action, but also for organizations like ourselves to push for that on the one hand with donors, and then also sometimes to really step into it with local partners. And I do think the sector, organizations like ours have done so. We have some good examples where we've seen it done well. I think Save the Children has done it in Syria with Syrian organizations with the RISE project, which is a fantastic example of local action. And to Yvonne's point, when we've been pushed into it, like this year, when we had to do an emergency response in Vanuatu, when we had to do an emergency response in Indonesia, in Sulawesi a couple of years ago, internationals into the country because it wasn't allowed, all of a sudden we had to respond locally, and lo and behold, it was a fantastic response. So we've also proven to ourselves that we can do it. It's just been, you know, too inconsistent, and not always the case that it happens.
So for both of you, what advice would you give other international NGOs or our guests or at Devex World today on how they can seek to drive their organizations, whether they're at the leadership level or just starting in their career, to help them become more diverse, working with more local partners? What advice do you have for them? Yvonne, I'll start with you.
Okay, so yeah, in regard to local partners, my advice to international NGOs is to play a complementary role, right? So rather than taking up the space of national and local actors, play a complementary role. And when invited to do so, and we see the need, you know, to then step in, you know, where there are gaps, and see how we can upskill national and local actors to play those roles. Because I mean, at Save the Children, you know, our ultimate goal is to ensure that, you know, all the children, you know, have access to their rights. So at country level, for instance, they're duty bearers. The national government, local actors, civil society play a very key role in ensuring that that agenda is driven. So then the question is, what space or what could we do to strengthen those mechanisms? And when we do, then when we upskill, you know, the actors that you know, who are the, you know, the enduring duty bearers in that space, then we have more sustainable outcomes. So it's not about who does what. For us, ultimately, it's about, are the children accessing their rights?
Janti, any advice for our guests today?
I think there are 4 things people can do, particularly if you're in a leadership position in a development organization, humanitarian organization. I think first and foremost, it always starts with self. So you have to educate yourself. You have to have that growth mindset to say, what is it that I don't know in this space? And who should I listen to? Who can I bring in to my circle to be educated, right? And not be fearful of that. No matter how old you are, how long you've been there, you know, what seniority you have, perceived seniority you have. Organizationally, you have to hire, develop, promote, sponsor, whatever it takes, and you have to take risks, right? People cannot be what they cannot see, and you have to push yourself as an organization to recruit for diversity, whatever that looks like for your context, right? As we just discussed. Don't be afraid to put numbers on that and targets, because that's that is one of the ways that you can really push yourself to do it. Really look at the way you program as a third one, and work with your partners and how you can expand that. And then lastly, because we're all, a lot of us in this sector are also promoting certain narratives. What are the narratives that we are upholding and are promoting? And that is we can be really a proactive stance. It doesn't mean that we're necessarily avoiding to promote negative narratives, that we are avoiding to promote a racist narrative or a colonial narrative, but are we promoting positive narratives? And how do we do that? What does that look like? And that is something that we've started some work on in Save the Children, and that's hard, right? Because a lot of our narratives that we put out there really work for us. They get us attention, they get us money, they get us brand recognition. So we have to deeply think about what is it that we want to keep from that and that works, and that is in line with those values and targets, and what is it that we have to change.
And do you think we need an evolution or a revolution to make these changes?
I think you need, I do think you need to have a radical mindset about these things because you want to see what it could be like when it's different. I think you also have to really embrace the power of incremental changes that add up to a lot. And if you do a lot of them in all those 4 areas, I think you actually can see meaningful change in a relatively shorter space of time.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you both for sharing your insights with our guests today, leaving us with some wisdom to take back into our work and our organizations. So thank you both.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Yes. Thanks.